Hey everybody, so today is part 3 of my series on my very first Alpha 1 SX70 camera that I had modified by Dennis at Chromatic.parts. Be sure to watch part 1 and part 2 first if you've not already done that, because each of these videos build the knowledge. And additionally, if you've not subscribed to Visual Revolution, please subscribe. Your support on this platform makes what I do here possible, so thank you. The SX70 Alpha 1 camera has a flash sync speed of around a 25th to a 40th of a second. This particular rebuilt model, new board, the whole 9 yards, is a 1/25th of a second. Now, what does that mean? By having that slower flash sync speed, it's not a 4,000th of a second, a 2/50th of a second, it's a 25th of a second. It means that under most lighting circumstances, with the exception of photographing in a really dark room, the flash and the ambient are going to balance a little bit. 25th of a second means that the ambient in the room around me is going to fill some of that space up with the flash, and the balance between the two are going to feel better. It's not going to feel as harsh. Now, the flash that I use on this camera is an old one that I had by, it's by Mint. It's an old version because it says Impossible on it, but they still make this flash bar, and it simply pops in the top of the camera like that. It has 2 different settings on the back. You have half power and full power. Pretty simple to use, but it actually does a really, really good job of providing that extra light when you need it. Now, on this camera, on this rebuilt by Dennis, there's a couple of really great options. I could go into the app. If you remember, this particular camera now has Bluetooth capability. I could go into the app and I can control the shutter speed based upon a manual light meter reading and slow down the light even more and use this camera for like a pop to provide that little bit of extra light when you're shooting in a low light scenario. The really neat thing about this camera is the flash fires at the end of the exposure and not at the beginning. So I did a lot of tests, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. So the other way to control exposure is by using this dongle that I mentioned. It's Bluetooth connected to the camera. It has a light meter built in. You can fully manually control the ISO, any of the settings that you want from shutter speeds. And this also has a remote release, which is really great. So what I did is I went in and I set up a scene in my living room, just a really fast, quick shot. And I was looking at what the scene would look like with a handheld light meter, and I took the first picture. And what you're seeing right now is the first photo. And the first photo, as you can see, is really dark. The light meter was being influenced heavily by the bright windows in the background and massively underexposed the foreground. Now, that exposure was f8 at 1/2 of a second. Now, if we look at the second image that I'm pointing to, that image was done once again at f8 at 1/2 a second, but at half flash power. Look how amazing it looks. It balanced the foreground, brought up the background, just looks really good in overall exposure and contrast. The third image that you're seeing, once again, f8 at 1/2 a second, was at full power. I really like how the background looks, but the foreground is just getting nuked with light, and it's just a little too much energy. But once again, by having the ability of controlling the shutter speed, it really allows me to balance that flash ambient light relationship. Additionally, on top of the dongle / remote control, there is a mini port up top that would allow you to plug this into a larger studio setup and give you even more control over your camera. I, for one, am really excited because having this ability with the manual control means that I can just stick the flash bar on and shoot. But I can also go in and control that shutter speed and really play with the relationship between flash and ambient light. Thank you very much for listening. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Now go shoot some film.